Now I have to look to Leo to ask how to proceed. The agenda says 11, and I think people might have questions. Okay, so are there questions on the phone? Or online? Does anyone know? If there are, please bring them to me. From the audience, my blood's boiling. I'm excited. How should we restructure labor? What should we do? How do we get the groups going? Are there any questions from the audience? Please come up to the microphone. Great, thank you. Yes,
so,
and please state your name.
Sure, David Madland from Center for American Progress. So Guy, you described a global phenomenon here, but basically most of the politics are local or at most national. So what does your sort of political response look like?
Shall I answer for him? The theme of the new book and the theme of the second book is that we have to focus our efforts on constructing a new income distribution system and realize that the rental incomes are morally indefensible and economically indefensible. John Maynard Keynes predicted in 1936 that the 20th century would see the euthanasia of the rentier. It's actually been the opposite. And we need a strategy to create the euthanasia of the rentiers. And I believe in a basic income. I believe in local action to put pressure on the politicians to change their attitude on basic income. I gave a talk to an international group of trade union leaders a couple of weeks ago, and some of them had been listening to me 5 years ago, and I've always said, why is it that if I propose a basic income, the most vehement opposition has come from trade union leaders? I think it's disgraceful. But I can say with great pleasure that that's changing rapidly, and the younger trade union people, activists, are taking a different approach to that. But there are a lot of other policies that I've got in the article, in the book.
Response as well?
No, I do think that the principle of subsidiarity, in which power and authority is focused on the lowest level, able to carry out effectively the policies, is a good way forward. I'm recalling now the Great Depression when the New Deal was formed. There was a lot of experimentation by the state level, and some things worked, some didn't work. And so what I see now, I'm just focusing right now on the United States. I think Guy's right as far as the big picture, but I'm focusing right now on the United States, and it seems to me, given the amount of gridlock we have in the federal system at the national level, what we need is like local experiments, and there are some exciting ones. You look at California with its paid family leave policies, minimum wage laws are being tried in various localities, and so I'm all for the notion of focusing on the local communities where people actually care about economic development, and to try to create some sort of stability to get back this middle level of institutions. And some things will work, some things won't work, but maybe one day the successful things will bubble up to the national level, and eventually the international level.
Leah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I would argue for working at all these different levels. That is, just looking at the questioner, I would be concerned about these local experiments, but then linking these local experiments to rebuilding institutions broadly, so that on the one hand, affiliates of, or quasi-affiliates of the AFL-CIO that aren't unions, that are pre-union structures or whatever, that speak to the precariat that Guy is talking about, would be very important. But then on the other hand, rethinking how we organize the regulation of wages and work and income in a more progressive way, and linking these three things together. And in addition, in relation to the regulation of the global market system, which I didn't speak so much about, but I don't think that it should be disconnected from this local experimentation that's quite important as well.
Thank you. The gentleman at this mic, please.
Hi, I'm David Bensman from Rutgers. I've learned a lot from all three of the speakers in the past few years as well as this morning. But I do think that it's not just the precariat that is suffering from precarious labor. I think that the whole labor market has become precarious. And I guess the example that I would use is a Chicago school teacher who's got a union contract, seniority, and a pension, but whose school could be closed down tomorrow by the school board and can be assigned to a charter school and lose most of what he or she has gained in protections. And I think that all through corporate America, all through the university systems and throughout the society, not only here but around the world, the idea of job security and social security has been eroded. So I think that the class analysis that we do has to include a broader range of people. I think associated with that is it's not just the white working class that voted for Trump. It was a whole sector of American society that's been left behind and has been made insecure.
Sir, is there a question or no? It was just a statement.
Well, I guess I want to know whether I'm misunderstanding the three speakers or whether they agree with me.
Leah, would you start us, please?
Sure, I will. And I don't know, I suspect Guy will have something to say about this because of his comments about the salariat versus the proletariat and the precariat and the lumpen. And this is maybe a point that Guy and I have a subtle disagreement about, and where I tend to agree quite a bit with you, David, as you may guess. And that's my point about the degraded SER. One of the things to me, I always found that in trying to do a comparative study of precarious employment in, let's say, industrialized contexts, how do we explain contingency in the U.S.? How do we explain what's happening with full-time, ongoing employment? Is that the sort of tenuous nature, and partly because of the decline of collective bargaining, and the collective bargaining being so important in terms of accessing defined benefit plans, employer-sponsored benefits of a certain sort, the kind of social wages that Guy has talked about, they're being insufficient, and that I tried to underline, is that I think that those of us that hold tenured positions or tenure-track positions, just to use the post-secondary education sector as an example, are deeply implicated in are deeply affected by these changes, and that one of the big problems that Randy alluded to at the outset is this sort of the assumption that there is on the one hand this precarious group, not to suggest that agency workers, this is my first book, aren't highly precarious and gendered and racialized, but that in fact there is that the group that are in these sort of full-time ongoing situations that are increasingly precarious, or where there's a great deal of work intensification in the case of those that are part of those that are fortunate enough to be employed, share a lot of insecurities with and the future of our world, the kind of communities we live in, whether they're gated or whether they're not gated, where children go to school, when you think about the public school system, share a lot in common. So that's one of the reasons I think it's so important to think about, on the one hand, this degraded SER model, and on the other hand, this tiered SER model. And in fact, a lot of my work has been on the employment relationship. That's my starting point. But arguably, this is also, and Guy speaks of it in a different way than I do, but definitely a distributive problem. That is, it's not incidental that it was largely white, citizen-born, citizen men who had this SER, and that it was upheld by a group of many women who worked, a lot of unpaid work and a lot of paid work in the case of African American women in your context, in the case of Indigenous women in the Canadian context and elsewhere, that upheld this norm, and that those relations of distribution too are falling apart in the face of the crumbling of the kind of welfare status institutions that the three of us have alluded to.
Arnie.
I agree with her. On pretty much everything she said. I just want to emphasize a couple of additional points. One is that the reason why I emphasized white men is not only because these are the guys that had the SER that don't have them anymore. It's also the group that the Democrats really didn't really take into account in the election. I mean, there was a lot of identity politics in the Democratic Party, which is one of the debates that are occurring right now. But I had this cartoon in my local paper this morning, which had a Democrat and a Republican. The Democrat had a list of a variety of identity groups that they were a long list of identity groups that they were supporting and everything. And the Republican next door just had one, which is white men. So I think this is a very important issue. But I think that group is the one that's been sort of neglected, and to our peril. And the other point I want to make is I agree with you that, of course, the whole labor market, that's the point about the degraded SER. But I really think that job security is something which is very difficult to legislate in the future given the rapidity of social change and technological change. What I would much rather focus on is having labor market security, having a skill set that you can then build on over time, not so much in a particular job, but in terms of one's career narrative, and the social protection, so that when you lose your job, you don't lose other social protections. To me, that's the key to navigate the future.
And Guy, would you like to? This will be the last comment from the panel.
Yeah, I think you might look at the second book, because I've tried to explain why it's so important to differentiate these different groups. And part of it is about the different sources of income. If you're in the salariat, you're actually getting several different sources of income, including rental income through bonuses, through tenure, through whatever it might be. And they have a different range of rights that they possess. Whereas if you're in the precariat, you don't. You don't have any of those sources of income. But you also, I think, have to realize that, and this relates to why I say the precariat should not be seen just as victims. The salariat are tied to their labor. They see their labor as the essence of their existence, their employment. And it's very important to differentiate between employment security and job security. They're not the same. Mm-hmm. Employment security is about your tenure. Your job security is about having control over what it is you're doing and developing. And the salariat tends to have that latter part, whereas the precariat doesn't. But the benefit for the precariat can be summed up in two statements that I've seen on walls in Madrid and in Turin, I think they were. One which I've always think is a really subversive statement, which is the worst thing would be to go back to the old normal. It's a very subversive statement. The typical precariat does not think that some sort of ideal is to go back to full-time, stable labor. That's not in his dreams. And the other piece of graffiti was from a young woman who was part of the Italian precariat, and I managed to have a discussion, and she said, "My dreams are not in your ballot box." Very radical statement. And I think that the unions have to understand why those statements are being made and what they represent. It's a different vision of work that they're pursuing. And we have yet to see the unions engage with the vocabulary, because we need a new vocabulary to engage with people. That's part of our biggest challenge in the next couple of years.
I want to really thank each of our panelists. They have been fantastic. And I would be remiss if I did not apologize to the microphone that we were unable to get to due to time. But I've learned a lot, and I can't wait to have a lot of conversations.
Okay, we're going to take a 10-minute break, exactly 10 minutes, and we'll be back here for the first panel on organizing.